Lord, we thank you for bringing us here today. We know that we are talking about some of the details of worship, and sometimes that seems a little less spiritual than thinking about the biblical side, the theological side of worship. But we know that even the technical side of worship adds up. And we pray that the kinds of technological barriers that we may be having in our own churches, that we would be able to get through some of those, we'd be able to understand some of those things, and that the people that have come today will be able to go back to their churches and lead even more effectively because of our time together. Pray that you would be in all that is said. In Jesus' name, amen. So my name is Greg Shear, and I'm here to talk to you about sound technology. You have your handouts. Everybody's got the handouts? Yeah, all right, great. I will just say a few things about me. I do technology really by necessity. I am not, I guess in some ways I'm a technological person. I enjoy some technological things. But in church work, it's just something that I've learned by necessity, because I have understood that, I'm sure that you've been in this kind of situation. You have a praise band rehearsal, you get everything just right, and then you get into, you know that. Those harmonies that you worked on, suddenly it doesn't matter because that mic never went on, or because there was feedback, or all those kinds of things. And as I said in my prayer, we think of technology as a little bit less spiritual than some of the other things that we do, and but the reality is if we're musicians, learning scales, learning how to do a sound system is actually an important part of what we do, right? So it's if we play out of tune, then it becomes increasingly hard for people to worship. If there's feedback, I don't know about you, but when a sound system in a church that I'm leading at, if there's a ringing where I know that it's about that far from erupting into feedback, I can't concentrate, because I'm just thinking, when's it going to happen, right? The other shoe is going to drop, and I don't know when it's going to happen, and I'm ready to duck. So and I won't go into all the war stories, because you have war stories of your own, and we don't need to spread bad juju. So what I'm going to do is this. I am going to assume that you are not a technological whiz, that you are someone that's learning about this. And I think that I'm going to be able to break this down in a fairly simple way that's going to help you understand it. And what my hope is not necessarily that you're going to be able to go back to your church and on Sunday morning sit behind the board and run sound effectively, but that you will be able to talk to your sound people better, that you will be able to buy a system. If you're looking into purchasing a system, that you'll be able to purchase a system, that you will have the tools to understand basically what is happening at your soundboard, so that with some time, you'll be able to learn that. So, for example, I went. This is a new board to me back at the back of the room. It's a digital board, so there are lots of things that are different. So, in some ways, I was a little bit lost as I was looking at that board. But I know that in time, because I know the principles of running sound, that in time I would be able to run that if it were in my church. So, you see at the top of your handout that it says it's simple: input, mix, and output, and it really is that simple. So let's take a look at this. So if you're looking back here at the sound system, you're probably thinking, man, that looks really, really complicated. But it's not that complicated. You have an in, and you have an out, and then you have something in between where you mix it. So this is what a sound system looks like. This is the basic idea of a sound system. Let's take a couple scenarios that are going to be really simple for you to understand. So you have a banjo. Well, it's a 6-string banjo, which this actually is. I think it's a banjotar. So it's an electric banjo. You all have an electric banjo at your church. And so it has this is your input. This is your sound source right here. And out of the sound source, it comes into a line, and then it goes into an amp. That's our amp. See, really, I should have Betsy in here helping me with the art side of this. But I'm getting the point across. So you have an amp, and actually, in this setting, your input is the banjo, and your amp both mixes it and is the output. Because once the sound goes into the amp, you mix it, let's say you put a little bit more treble on the sound, and then it goes out to the speaker. All right, so very, very simple kind of idea. Let's do another one. You've got a microphone, and it goes to a cord. That's the worst looking microphone ever, so sue me. So let's say you're a marching band director. You've got to have some kind of simple setup so that you can talk to your musicians. You can amplify your voice. You're going to speak into a microphone. It's going to go into an amp. And then it's going to go out the speaker. All right? So this basic idea, sound source, the amplifier, the mixer, and then the output. And it's as simple as that, all right? But of course, when you look up here, you understand that there's a lot more to it. But you have to keep the basics in mind, and it's going to be a lot easier for you. Now, if you look on your handout, what you're going to see is that you have a, hold on, there we go, that I have it lined up that way. On the left side of the first page, you've got input, mixer, output. And we're going to talk about each of those things. As we talk about those things, we will refer to various parts inside the packet. So mostly, if you look at page 3 is where we'll start. So keep your thumb in page 3 there. So if we have, oh, you're getting a shine on it? Okay, does that add glare for you guys? No, you okay? All right. And then, oh yes, here's my eraser. Sometimes you have to go with old technology. All right, so I'm going to keep the in, the mix, and the out, because I think that will be helpful for us. So we're going to talk first about the inputs. So the inputs, often what the input is a microphone. This is a microphone. I think that you guys are beyond something that basic. But I will tell you a couple things about microphones that you're going to want to think through. Microphones, you have wired or wireless. Let's just talk quickly about what that means. So this is obviously a wireless, because there's no wire. The advantages of a wireless is that you can go anywhere with it. The disadvantages is they have batteries, which can fail. They have, they're usually pretty stable at this point in the kind of life of technology. They're usually pretty stable. I mean, I've been in situations where the transmitter is out because of battery problems or whatever, and the receiver is saying, give me a signal, and what does it find? Like a vacuum cleaner or something like that. I mean, it can be really, horrible at its worst, but for the most part, the technology is pretty good. But just remember that the axiom for sound people is when you go with anything with a battery, it can fail, right? So you have to, just be aware of that. You increase your problems with the wireless. So just understand that. It's also a little bit more expensive. You have battery issues. So if you have a singer right here, or a guitarist right here, there's really no reason to make that a wireless mic, right? You're just going to cause yourself headaches. You put them on a cord, make it a wired mic, and be done with it. It's going to go. It's going to be the cleanest signal path, the least problem, the least money. Right, so you don't need a receiver, transmitter, all those kinds of things. It's just a wire going into the system, and you're fine. Phantom power. I will say this now, and then I will say it again. Most wired microphones take what's called phantom power. The board sends out a small amount of voltage to power up that microphone. And at your board, you're either going to have a switch that turns phantom power on for all the channels, or a switch for every channel for the phantom power. I don't know how many times I have been in the situation where no one knows why the system isn't working, why the microphone isn't going on. You know, it's on, I swear it's on. It's the phantom power. So just, you know, be aware that, that you need to know if your microphone, most dynamic microphones need phantom power. Make sure that you have the phantom power in your, if your microphone doesn't have a battery, then it's probably phantom power. Make sure that that is on. The polar pattern, cardioid, omni, all that kind of stuff. Look on page 3, you see the cardioid mic pattern at the top right. Cardioid, like cardiac arrest, it's a heart-shaped pattern. Why is this important? Every microphone has a pattern, all right? So if I'm talking into the microphone, this is a cardioid microphone, the pattern is a heart-shaped pattern like this. It rejects from the back. So if I'm talking to the back, it's different. Now, if this were an omni pattern microphone, omni being all, it would pick up as much from here as it would from here. But obviously that's not the case with this. Why is that important? Because when you're in this setting, let's say I'm in front of this speaker right here, this monitor, I could turn up this monitor very, very loud. Because this is a cardioid, it rejects sound from the back. All right? So if I have it perfectly this way, I can turn it up really, really loud before it feeds back. But if I turn it around, it's gonna feed back. And so that's actually, use that to your advantage. A lot of people will do things like they'll set their microphone up like this. Well, it's actually picking up quite a bit from that monitor. And so then now you have some issues with that. It also means that if I get too far in front of these speakers right here, it's going into the microphone rather than rejecting from this side. So all of those things are important. Most of the time, you don't have to worry about that. You are just buying a microphone that is for a singer or to mic a guitar cabinet or something like that. It's generally going to be cardioid, but just know what the pattern is. There's cardioid, supercardioid, omni, an 8 pattern. You know, there are all sorts of different patterns, but generally speaking, for live sound, you're working with a cardioid because you want that rejection. Yes, when I came in today, they asked me if I wanted a handheld or a headset. There are advantages and disadvantages of each one. So you see there under microphones, mic stands. Do you want it in the mic stand or do you want it held? Some of this is an aesthetic issue. If your church is trying to figure out if they want to do contemporary worship or not, it might very well be that having a row of people holding microphones is going to be kind of a turnoff. In the same way that, you know, you bring the drum set in and it's kind of the final frontier for some churches. It's like, you know, now it's really going contemporary because there's a drum set. Same thing with the microphones. And you know, people learn how to use microphones from American Idol and that kind of thing. So then you've got that, you know, one kid that's grown up and they're like, right? And suddenly it becomes a different thing. So I like to minimize that, and I generally speaking have my singers in a mic stand. They put the mic in the mic stand, and you know it can create problems too, but it minimizes some of those kinds of distractions. So mic stand, handheld. Another issue with a handheld is how much sound are you going to have, right? So it depends on you know how fidgety the person is, right? But this is not helping anything. All right, so now the sound person has to worry about the fact that not only what does your voice sound like, but why do they keep hitting it, right? And so that's another issue. You tend to get a little bit of cleaner sound. Like you'll never see anybody in a studio with a handheld mic. It just doesn't happen because there's too much danger when the sound is critical. You don't want that. Lapel or lavalier microphone. A few people use these at this point because so that's the kind that will clip onto your shirt. They were quite popular 10 or 20 years ago because they were about the best technology that you could get. One of the issues with the difference in mic styles is you have to understand that you always give something up. All right, you can get a race car, but if you need to move a ton of dirt, a race car doesn't help you very much, right? So it's not that a race car is a better car, it's just it's better for going fast, right? If you want a dump truck, if you want to move some dirt, it's the same thing with technology. This microphone has a fairly big diaphragm. The thing that actually receives the sound is quite big, and so it can be a little bit more of a faithful sound. The issue with, say, the headset microphone is that it's a much, much smaller diaphragm that is receiving the sound. And so, once again, you'll never, in a studio, you'll never, ever, ever have someone recording a lead vocal with a headset, because you just can't get as good a sound. Now, is it as good of sound for live? Right? If your pastor is a fidgeter and you want to minimize that, then you can put that on there. But if they're a yeller, you might not want a sound source that's right here, right? I mean, there are all these kinds of considerations. So just be aware that there is no best sound. Generally people are moving from lavalier mics because the sound goes out this way and you're kind of catching the edge of the sound. Suddenly yells, that scratches their head a lot, that coughs, those kinds of things. A lavalier might be just the thing. So once again, there's no best microphone. There's the right microphone for the job. There's also lectern microphones, hanging microphones, and these are all for different things. So a lectern microphone would be what you would use at your pulpit if you have a pulpit and that kind of microphone. Once again, you're going to get pretty good sound. A pulpit microphone now, your diaphragm is going to be about this big, so that's not as big as this, but it's also not as small as this. So if you have a pastor, a preacher, who stays in place, a stationary microphone might be the best thing. Hanging microphones are generally going to be for things like the choir. All right, that's where you have I'm trying to think if we have any here. You could conceivably, now they have 2 microphones, overhead microphones for the drums, to get the general sound of the drums. And the reason that they use the mic stands for that is you can place those pretty well for a drum set. But if you have a general source like a choir, then a hanging microphone could be. If you know that you have a group that's going to be in the same place every week, then you know that can work. All right. Then you have instruments, so still in the input. What goes into the system? We just talked about microphones. Now we want to talk about instruments. So if you have an acoustic guitar, I think that all the acoustics today are going straight in. I guess one is going through a amp and one is going straight in. Generally, instruments like keyboards, guitars, you are going to take a line out of your guitar or your piano. You're going to run it into a DI box, a direct injection box, and lots of funky technology with that. But basically what it does is it amps up or amps down, I think it is, I can't remember the technology. It takes your line level from your keyboard and it equalizes it with what your microphone input is going to be, and it lets it go long distances. So just know that you are going to want to, unless you're standing at the board playing the guitar, you're going to want a DI box for some of those things, keyboards and guitar and those kinds of things. That's how we get it into the system. And I'll tell you the technology of it is this, that a microphone cable is a balanced cable, so you can run it long distances without it degrading. And so that's essentially what your DI box does, is you take your instrument, you get it to the microphone cable level, and then it can go a long distance without any noise. If you don't have that, it would just be a ton of noise. And then line level things like CD playback and all that. So all that is all in the input side. How do we get sound into the system? So it's going to be a microphone, it's going to be an instrument into a DI box, or it is going to be a line level thing like a computer or iPod or CD playback. Now, let's go to the mixer, because this is even more complicated. Any questions on that? We're all set so far? Yeah? Yeah.
I've done it both ways with guitars,
Mm-hmm.
through the DI box and straight into the mixer.
Mm-hmm.
What do you
Yeah, and just listen critically. There are, someone that's more technologically minded could tell you, oh, there's this particular reason. A DI box, one of the things it does is it,
Takes the high and converts it into a low.
well, yeah, so
Level equal all the way through.
it's a magnetic, I can't remember what they call it, but it's basically, there are some kind of static kinds of things that can enter a line, and so that when it goes in the DI box, what comes out is going to be a clean signal. In your setting, it might be okay. You might have, a short enough line that going straight in. So if I'm in a recording studio, I can put my guitar straight in. But in a live situation, you typically want to go for DI box. DIs are going to cost about, $80 to $200, somewhere around there. So, that's an expense, but it's kind of the cost of doing business. Question? Yeah, right. When you go 150, there'd be no way. I mean, they wouldn't even make a quarter-inch cable that long. Yeah, exactly. The hum would come in. So you eliminate the hum. Is the thing when you have a long line. Do I want to talk about? Yeah, I'll talk quickly about. You see that underneath the cardioid pattern on page 3. Just learn these different words so that you can talk with your sound people. XLR is a microphone cable. So you need to be able to at least, talk with your sound people and say, I need another XLR cable here for this microphone, that kind of thing. TRS is a tip ring sleeve, and it's very similar to a stereo quarter-inch, but the term with that would be like at the bottom, quarter-inch. That's a quarter-inch size. You see that it looks the same size as the TRS. It just has 3 connections. The TRS has 3 connections, and then you look on the bottom, you see that it's got 2 connections. They're both quarter-inch in size, but the quarter-inch is for guitars and pianos and those kinds of things. That's the cable that you use for those. Don't worry too much about the tip ring sleeve. It's something that they use really for hooking up the equipment in the back, so you can rely on your sound person for that. Then you have, on the consumer audio side of the things, in the middle of it, you have your stereo, your 1/8-inch stereo. That's what's coming out of your iPod, iPhone. Then you've got your RCA, which is for, say, stereo, for the outs of your DVD and CD players, those kinds of things. You've probably seen those before. So just be aware of the different kinds of connections that can be made. I generally try to have a lot of connections and reconnectors online, or available, so if I need them. So for example, let's say I'm going out from a CD player. I'm coming out with the RCA jack. So I want to have an adapter that lets me go from RCA to quarter-inch so that I can go into the stereo ins on a mixer. See, so, that's when you have to be thinking about, when you call up your supplier, you say, I'm going out from an RCA, stereo, and I'm going into to 2 channels on my board. I need to get from RCA to quarter-inch, that kind of thing. And so you need to be able to converse about that. All right, so the mixer. What you want to know about the mixer. The patch bay. The patch bay, generally speaking, is going to be, for your day-to-day work, your patch bay is not something that you're going to be looking at. The patch bay is what you use to patch things in. So when you come from the ins, they probably have a snake. Yes, they do. Right back in the back, you can look at this later, they have what's called a snake. And the snake is where you make all your connections right here. You send all of your instruments, your microphones, all that goes into the snake. It snakes back to the board, and then all those connections are made. Okay, so then what ends up happening, because you're not close enough to the board to connect directly to it, you have to have a this intermediary step. So what happens is you've got, what is it, 32 channels, 16, 32, something like that. Usually goes in increments of 8. So it's 16 or 32 channels will then go back there, and they're going to want to connect. Maybe you have 8 vocal mics, and they go into the board back there. Now you can wire these a number of ways, but that patch bay is the thing that allows you to do that. All right, so that you kind of know where things are coming in, and you can usually what the mixer does is it lets you reroute it, but it has to get in physically. So we won't spend a ton of time on the patch bay, but we will spend time on the channel strip. The difficulty people have is with sound systems. If you look on that same page 3, this is a diagram from a Mackie mixer. 1604 means that there are 16 inputs and that there are 4 subgroups. Now, if you look at the top there, you see channel strip and master section. When you look at a mixer, it's pretty overwhelming, isn't it? You see some stuff here, and then you just see all these boom, 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 and you look at it and your eyes glaze over. You say, I don't even know where to start. All right? I hear that chuckle. I've been there too. Well, let's break it down, and I think that by the time we're done, you're going to have a pretty good idea of what to look for on a board. These are channel strips. And it's very, very simple. Each of these has sound coming into it. We've talked about the input. I could take a microphone, I could stick it into the patch bay on channel 1, and now I've got a sound source coming into channel 1. Okay? Now if you look on page 3 where it says channel strip and master section, you'll see at the top of the channel strip it says 16. What I did is I took the whole board and I cut off 15 of the channels for simplicity. So now we can concentrate on just of a 16-channel board. Instead of being overwhelmed by everything, we're looking at channel 16, right? So that left column is channel 16. So we are going to start by talking here, but basically the idea is this. The sound comes in for, let's just say it's for a vocal, okay? So this is our Vox 1. You are going to mix it, and then you are going to send it to some of the places on the master sections. But let's start with the channel strip. And we're going to start at the top of the strip. You've got what's called the gain or the pad. The gain is this. You might say, you might be used to looking at a board and looking at the very bottom, the slider, right? What's called either the slider or the fader. And you might say, oh, I push that up and I get volume. I push it down and I get less volume, right? Well, that's true. But you have to have sound coming into the channel first. So look at the very top and you've got the gain, all right? So this is where what they call gain staging. Basically, think of it kind of like water. If you were to turn on your faucet, you ever had you turn on your faucet and it sputters? It's because there's not water coming into that line, right? Something is obstructing the line at the house so that the water isn't coming in. You turn your faucet on and it sputters instead of giving you water, okay? Same kind of thing. The gain is the water coming into the house. And what you want is not too much, not too little. You want a nice, good flow of sound. So what you're doing at that point is you're setting the gain stage, the gain, so that it's not distorting. All right, so it's not peaking, because once it distorts, there's nothing you can do. All right, it's distorted. Doesn't matter how much you turn it down, the sound is distorted. So you want to have it up far enough that it's rich but not distorted. If you go too low, you have what's called a signal to noise ratio, which is bad. If you go too low, all of the stuff that could be in a signal, which is a lot of and problems, right? You get too much of that, and that's the sputtering issue, right? If you don't get enough sound, when you go to turn that slider up, you don't get what you need, all right? So what you want is good, rich sound coming in, and some people, what they do, they call it zeroing out the channel, and they bring the channel strip, the slider, they bring it up to 0, which 0 in sound terms means that you're not changing the sound at all. It's like there is no volume on there. All right, it's like not having a volume. You're not lifting it up, you're not bringing it down. You're just letting it go straight through. So they put it at 0, and then they change the gain to get what they want. So there are different philosophies about doing it, but that's a decent way. But the real big point is that you need to make sure that what comes into your channel is the right sound, and you do that with the gain, and you do it before anything else happens. Now, the next thing that happens, and this is a little bit confusing, but the confusingness of it is also the beauty of it. Because what happens is this: once you get the right sound coming into the channel and the gain knob, now you've got a sound that is good enough you can send to any number of places. We think of it as adjust the gain of this voice, and then I can hear it in the speakers. That's true. But what if we want to hear the voice in the monitor? All right, now it gets fun. So we've got our gain, and let's say we've got a good sound here. Now, we get into our AUX section. Let's say we want to route this in different ways, and this is the great thing about it. I want this to go to monitor. I want it to go to recording. And often this can become quite sophisticated. It can be, you can hook up all sorts of things. You can do monitors, sometimes 4, 8 monitor mixes. So for example, the singer themselves might need more of that monitor. All right, so you're sending it over to the monitor section. You might send it to 4 different monitor sections. The drummer doesn't need much of that vocalist, but the vocalist does, right? So now you've got different monitor setups. You've got different recordings. Maybe you have a crying room in your church, and you have you want to send some of the sound over there. Now, why wouldn't I just let it go through here and let it go out and give everybody the same thing? Well, we already talked about the drummer needs a different mix than the vocalist does. But what about the crying room? If you just send what is coming in to the system, you just send it out both to the speakers and to the crying room, what happens? Let's say your guitar needs to be amplified quite a bit, but your drums don't, all right? So your drums, you barely have them amplified because they don't need it in a room of this size. But the guitar needs a ton of sound. Or that kind of pipsqueaky alto needs to be amplified a lot, right? So her gain is way up, but the drummer's gain is way down. Now what happens is if you just take the mix for the room and you send it out to the crying room, they're going to hear the guitar and the alto. That's all they're going to hear. They're not going to hear anything else. So what this does on the auxiliaries is it gives you the flexibility to create kind of mini mixes. All right? So the main mix, what they call the house mix or the front of house mix, is what you hear right here. But that might be a different thing. It will be a different thing. You've heard recordings of services, right? And you know how it is. You say, oh, the band sounded great. Let's listen to the recording. And really you're listening to a recording of an alto and a guitar player, right? And you can't hear anything else. And it's a really kind of discouraging thing, right? Now, whether your church has the sophistication to do this is another question. All right, so now we get into, so that's our AUX. Now we get into the EQ. The EQ, for equalization, it lets you turn up or down different parts of the sound. So assuming, how about this? Can you give me the overall EQ for my voice? This will be fun. Because I think that we can do the overall EQ. There we go. And can you make it live so they can see where the sound is happening? That'll be super awesome. All right. So you can see that I'm making sound in the top right, but pretty soon they're going to, does it have a live, thing? I think we're going to get that in a minute. So what you're seeing is this. On the EQ, if you think of it like this, you have the human being can hear from 20 to 20K hertz. 20 is the lowest. That's the kind of sound that you feel in your gut. And then 20K is, really overtones. That'll drive your dog crazy, but really what it does for humans is it's what adds the sizzle to the cymbals and the overtones. All right, there we go. Perfect. So when I'm talking, you can see where the sound is happening. So this is the 20K. That's the lowest, and see that there's nothing in there. Now watch this. Sorry about hitting your microphone like that. So now if I go. You didn't think you were going to have so much fun this morning, did you? So, see, isn't that awesome? So you see that there's sound down here, there's sound down here. When I go, it's more down there. Now you will notice though when I go, that there are still things happening. Those are overtones. Every sound has overtones as well, and that's what gives it its tone. In fact, we're gonna have even more fun. Can you do this? Can you give me a shelf to take out all the highs? All right. So now we're gonna EQ this bad boy in real time, so you can see. Yes. Can they see where that is happening? I'm in a cave. I'm in a cave. Please get me out. See what he did? If this is 20 to 20K, he did a shelf on the whole top half. Now you would say, as a man, my tone is going to be toward the middle, right? So he's actually not scooped out my sound at all. But when he takes out the high end, all the overtones, it takes out all the information that, we have to stop doing this because it's freaking me out. All right, see, now I'm back. All right, now do the same thing on the low end. So I'm going to be talking, and then I'm going to go from being a manly man with a big, full, rich voice to being pipsqueaky and thin. All right, now, this seems like you wouldn't want this, but actually, there are times when you EQ, if you make, I don't have the time to go into a lot of this, but if you make every channel sound natural, it's going to be overwhelming. All right, so right now, he's put back the low in my voice. If I were mixing this, and there are 4 other people, you know what you'd hear? You'd hear a bunch of gunk on the bottom. So take out a little bit of the low end. Let's take that out. Or I'm going to just keep talking, and we're taking out the low end. And see now what's happened? Now that the low end is out. If I were singing with 4 other people, this would sound beautiful. No problem at all. If I were singing solo, you'd want to add a little bit more and want to put a little bit more in there. So yeah, fill it back in this way. There we go. Yeah, and so now there's a little bit of warmth, all right? But this, I'm going to keep hitting this, add the low. So now I'm competing with the bass drum. And that's the problem with a lot of sound systems. They don't use the EQ to their advantage. And so you've got just this random person who just happens to be fidgety with their fingers. And now you've got a bunch of information in the low range that is not information, it's not audio information that is going to be helpful in any way. It's now competing with the bass drum and the bass player. So you want to use equalization to your advantage, all right? Just remember that a natural sound for your band, a natural sound is going to be a very different EQ than the natural sound for one singer. Okay, you would not want to take a ton of sound out. So your pastor, for example, if it's a male, if you don't have any of the low end in it, you lose all the depth, that kind of warmth, and you're going to get a very clinical sound. So you EQ. It's a matter of taste. How much salt do you use? There's no right answer. All right, pan. Oh man, this is fun. I'm geeking out here. You guys are geeking out? This is awesome. All right. So pan is left to right. So we have a speaker on the left and we have a speaker on the right. I don't know if the system is in stereo, but there is most music is panned is left and right. A lot of live mixes are not panned left and right. The other thing that you need to realize about the pan is that sometimes on some boards, let's say, do you know the difference between mono and stereo? So mono is 1, stereo is 2. A mono mix has all the same sound coming out of the speaker, out of both speakers, or however many speakers you have. A stereo mix means that it can be more or less in each speaker, okay? That is usually true when you're mixing for a recording. When you're mixing for live, let's say you have a mono mix. The same thing is coming out of both speakers. You're not going to be able to look left and look right and hear something different. So it's a mono mix. Sometimes what they do is over here in the subgroups, they run it by left and right. So your left and right is actually not panning it in the mix. It's sending it to a different subgroup. So in other words, you have, I can't remember how, I think you can actually see it. Yes, okay. If you look on the Mackie diagram, the bottom right, the sliders, the very right one is your main mix. That's just the main volume coming from the speakers. But then you've got those 4 to the left of that main one. Those are subgroups. And you see how it, above that on 1, 2, 3, 4, it says left, right, left, right. So then what you can do to get the sound, you would, on the channel, send the sound all left, assign the subgroup to left. Anything that's coming in on the left goes into that subgroup. Anything that's going to the right goes to the subgroup 2. And then it gives you complete control over those. So just be aware that that left-right in a live mix is somewhat relative. You have to know your board and know where it's going and how it is assigned. The assign button, speaking of where things are assigned, you are going to route the sound somewhere, okay? So it's just like water. The sound is coming in here. It is going to go somewhere, all right? And this is where you assign it to where it's going to go. So you might say, okay, I'm going to put all my vocals, we'll talk about the master section in a minute, but let's say all my vocals are on sub 1, okay? So these are all my vocals. They all go to sub 1. Why would I want to do that? Yeah. So once you get, the issue is this. All of these vocals, let's say they're acting as a unit, or your drums. Let's say you've got 8 mics for your drums. Do you want to turn up 8 channels when the drums start playing? No. And are you ever going to get the same mix that you got when you first put them there? No, because it's going to look like this, right? Who can do that? You can't. So what you do, you take all your voices, let's say your background vocals, you put them to one sub. Now I can retain the mix on my channels. I got the mix that I want for all my vocals. They sound perfect. I send them over here. Someone says, I want to hear more background vocals. Then you take one slider, and they all come up together. They're still in balance because the channels are balanced. But now my sub lets it go up or down. Then I take my drums, my 8 drum mics. I balance them together, okay? So this is the ratio of the hi-hat to the bass drum, all those kinds of things. Now it sounds perfect, all these eight channels. Instead of trying to turn all of them up, I assign them to subgroup 2, and then I can turn that subgroup up as I go. So that's where, we'll talk about that in the master section. But that's when I say assign it. You don't necessarily assign the channel to go straight out to the board. And you have to be aware of this because a board is meant to give you a lot of options. And that's why they're so confusing. But the beauty of it is this. I can send a bunch of different places. Let's say I have 4 auxiliaries on my board, and I've got 5 places that I need sound to go. Well, a crafty sound person will say, okay, these are my 4 monitor mixes. Now I'm going to assign each of these channels to different places. And I could assign that to multiple subgroups. I could assign it to a subgroup and to the main. And so then now I can use a subgroup to go to the crying room. All right, there are different ways. I mean, there are reasons why I wouldn't want to do that, but just know that there are a lot of options when you start to do that. So make sure that you are not doing something like assigning something to the main and to a subgroup, and you think you're pulling it down, but it's actually still also assigned to the main, and you're wondering why that mic is still on, right? So that's the difficult thing about sound systems, but it's also the cool thing about sound systems. The mute and solo button. Most of your channels will have a mute on them, and that is to, strange enough, mute the channel. That is a good way to get rid of the sound. Be careful about using that. I have worked with sound people who love mute buttons, and in my own church, I've tried to convince. We don't have a really big sound system, so it's not a big issue. But they prefer to mute the channels instead of using subgroups. And there a couple things happen. One is that you have to do this across, so in our setting, it works, right? You're turning up 5 channels at a time. You can do that, unmuting it. And the reason you would unmute it instead of pulling it up is that you can set the channel, mute it, and then it'll go back to the same place, right? Depending on the board, sometimes there's a click when you hit the mute, so you have to be aware of that. It's also sometimes probably a bigger issue, because most boards are pretty clean at this point. A bigger issue is this. The sound person wasn't aware that the pastor was going to walk up and start talking, right? Never happened in your church. And then they hit the mute button, and you go from nothing to all. And the pastor is in the middle of saying, "Is this thing on?" Right? And you get, is what you get, in middle of the sound. So that's one of the reasons that I'm not wild about using mutes, but just be aware that it's there. A solo button lets you listen to one channel on headphones. So you hit the solo button, and you can. Now, I don't want you to mix all the time with headphones, because it's a very different thing than what's happening in the room. But let's say you got to figure out, what does that guitar sound like? What's the issue? Do I need to EQ that? Do I need to turn it up? Is the gain right? So then you solo out that channel, and you listen on the headphones, and then you can kind of isolate the issues. All right. And then finally, last but not least, you get the fader or the slider. And that's where that's kind of your go-to volume control for the house. So generally speaking, if something is going wrong and there's something feeding back, you're going to pull down the slider. That's kind of your go-to move. All right. A lot of information. Any questions on channel strip? You're just overwhelmed with excitement, I think, is really what's going on here. Yeah.
For a minor point, but we still have a church that does things totally different than what you're describing.
Uh-huh.
One of the things we do is record,
Uh-huh.
and we do use the mute buttons. What we have learned to do is we never turn off all of them at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
We switch from one to the other. We switch the new one in, the old one off, so there's no dead hole.
Mm-hmm.
There's always ambient noise you're picking up.
Now,
Recording, you just
yeah.
you think you died, and then all of a sudden it comes back.
That's all right. So this is a really interesting question. I am going to make a guess about how you have your recording routed, and I'm going to make a suggestion to you. So the point is about the recording and how you mute and unmute channels, because you have the ambient noise is going to change, and it's kind of this odd thing. You have this kind of color happening, and then it changes. I am going to bet that you're making your recording from a subgroup. You're not. Are you doing it over here on your auxes?
We use the 1, 2, 3, 4 groups.
Down on in your master section.
We use the left, right for recording.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4 for live sound.
So one of the things, and I didn't talk about this, is pre and post fade. And this is your friend. Well, it's your friend if you know how to use it, and it's your enemy if you don't. Pre and post fade. So this is your fader. I would have to be looking at a board. It's a little bit complicated. Yes. Your auxiliaries. Generally speaking, you're going to run them pre-fade, and this is why. The sound comes in. Let's say you're going to recording. You run the recording pre-fade. That means this does not affect this. So then I can set my volume. I decide that I want, to boost the drums in the recording. I set it pre-fade. I can pull this up and down all I want to, and nothing happens to it. All right. So this is pre-fade. What I do in my church, I have overhead mics that are doing the bulk of the recording. You know, I want a live sound. I want it to sound like you're there. So I have 2 mics in stereo. They go directly to the recording, pre-fade, and they're on the whole time. And then I go. It depends on the channel. Some of them I want post-fade. So, for example, the pastor. If he is muttering to himself before a sermon, and you have it pre-fade record, it's going straight into the recording. You see? So you're siphoning that off, even though this is down, this is in. So anyways, just use that to your effect for that recording. What I do is I have those 2 mics on all the time, so that then my coloration never happens, because my basic mics are always on. You always get the same room noise throughout the whole recording, and then you bring things up, either pre or post fade, depending on what they are. All right, well, oh my goodness, the time is just slipping away. All right, now, we're going to go quickly through the master section, because I actually want to get to the second page. I heard that they are going to just bring in pizza for lunch so we can stay all afternoon. I'm kidding about that. All right, I talked a little bit about these already, the master section. Basically, the master section, subgroups, main fader, AUX, control room. That is where the sounds come in. We talked about the channels. We talked about where you send them. And now in the master section, you have control over that. So you have your vocal mix. All your vocalists are going to monitor one to monitor one in the AUXs, and they say, we don't have enough monitor. Now you don't change that on the channel. You go over to your monitor or your AUX 1, which all your vocalists are to. You turn that up, and that gives you main volume. So it's basically like your master gives you a bunch of main volumes, right? So channel comes in the channel, it goes over to the master section, and then this is where you're going to turn up the house sound, these speakers, you're going to turn up the monitors, you're going to turn up the crying room, all those kinds of things. You can have, that's where you turn up those main volumes. I'm not going to go into a ton of that. Now, yeah, and then I'll talk about the output. The output is also pretty easy. The mix is the hardest part. The output now, you've got your house speakers, which would be these. That's the main sound, and most of your attention is going to be to the house. You are going to be in a band setting, in a big band. They have FOH, front of house mixer, and that person pays attention to the front of house, all the critical stuff. Do the mics come up at the right time? All that kind of thing. A couple things to remember about this. Front of house mixer is in a big setting, in a rock band setting. You go to Van Andel Arena or something like that and hear a band. Front of house mixer is different than the person that's doing the monitor mix, different than the person that's doing the recording mix, all right? Because it's so complicated, you need different people to do it in those settings. It's not going to be that complicated in your setting, but you need to understand that it's very unlikely that your sound person is going to mix a good sound in your house and also get you a good recording. All right? It's just, I've never seen it happen before. All right? Now, I've not been in the most technically sophisticated churches, generally speaking, but I just have never seen it happen. They're doing, I mean, if you can get a sound person that's paying enough attention to turn the microphones on at the right time and be, you know, I mean, you know what I'm talking about, right? You know, you look back and the sound person is talking to their kids or whatever, right? Yeah, I know. And this is, you know, I'll just preempt something on the second page. Dummy-proof your system. The reason that I have the recording system that I have is because I know that if I've got those two microphones, those two hanging microphones, 80% of the recording is from those microphones, that I know even if my sound person has a heart attack and flop over right then, I'm going to get a recording of the service, right? I mean, I hope that they don't, but I'm saying if they did, maybe the service wouldn't keep going. I'm not sure. That's really a side point. We won't follow that. But the point is this, that no matter what happens, how much they pay attention to either the house or to the recording, you're going to get a really decent recording because of those two microphones. That's one of the ways I've dummy-proofed the system. I will go into the system, and I know enough to, if I'm working with people that I have to train, like here, the sound people know what they're doing, right? So I'm actually talking to them, I'm asking them questions about the sound system, but most of the time when I'm in a church, I have to take initiative on this. I have to pull the system apart and figure out where is stuff going? Why is this, not going to logical channels? I will go in and I'll do the pre and post stuff. My sound people might not really know how that works. So I go in, I hit pre and post, I tape it down or whatever I have to do so that I get the things going to the recording or the monitors or whatever that I want. All right? And that's, once again, dummy proof it. If you can get your sound people to pay attention, bring up the faders when the band comes in, when the pastor comes in, when the person with the handheld mic comes in, then you're doing pretty well. So then dummy proof as much of the system as you can otherwise. So house speakers, you got monitors. A monitor is a way for a person to monitor what they're doing. You will notice that we have two what's called wedges. They're called wedges because they have that wedge type of sound. They are wedged so that they can come up to you. Also, you should know that wedges have two different angles typically. And this allows you to kick it back a little bit further. If I were to flip this over, it would have a different angle and it would send the sound up a little bit. So it works fine. If I'm standing right here, then I get the full effect of the monitor. But if I were down here, I'd want the wedge to be at a higher angle. So just understand that the wedges have two different angles. Put them to the appropriate place. You also, for monitors, you have in-ear monitors. You have little, see this one right here? It's a satellite, or a brand name is a Hotspot, but it's a little tiny monitor. So sometimes a keyboard player or a vocalist will want something small like that as their monitor. Hearing loops, it's all the same thing, in, mix, and out. I'm talking about outs right now. I can send it to my house, I can send it to my monitor, I can send it to my in-ear monitor, I can send it to a hearing loop, okay? And your soundboard, the mixing section, gives you the option of sending it to all those different places. And then sending it to recording is the other thing. All right, quick questions. You are thirsty for knowledge, and you want to continue. The issues page, we're going to go through the issues page as quick as we can, because I think these are issues that you are going to want to know about. Now, feedback. No one ever had that issue, right? All right. Feedback is this, you all know what it is, that squealing that you get. I am, I think, going to tell you some things that are going to maybe surprise you, perhaps astound you, and certainly excite you. So on page 2, potential acoustic gain or gain before feedback. Gain, remember we talked about the gain knob? Gain means simply volume. How much volume can we get before it starts feeding back? There are a bunch of factors here. So let's say this is our sound floor. Our sound floor. And just like a regular floor, it kind of sets the lowest level. In my church, we have this issue. We have a changing sound floor. When the heating comes on, the sound floor rises by, I don't know how many decibels, but significantly. All right? So listen, let's just stop for a minute. So this has a fan running in it. Not a lot of noise otherwise, right? So similar kind of thing in my church, except when the HVAC comes on. So now my sound floor has just raised. The reason that is important is because the sound floor is like a regular floor. You can only build on top of it. So let's just say, I don't know how many decibels this would be, but let's just say it's 10 dB of HVAC, all right? So you've gone from 0 dB, a completely quiet room, to 10 dB, all right? So now you have to get above that sound, all right? So that's one of the first issues of of feedback. So the room noise, let's see, how do I say all this? All right, and then the critical distance is a similar kind of thing to the sound floor. Can I use, yeah, I'll use a different diagram. Critical distance is like this. You have direct sound, and let's say this is decibels. This is the loudest. And as you get further away, the sound diminishes. Okay, sound dissipates with distance. Then there's a point at which you go into feedback. So if I were to push this speaker as loud as I could, at a certain point, it equals, or it dissipates enough to equal the reverberant sound. So if I were to step out into this congregation, this is a fairly, it's a fairly live room, but we've got speakers right here. So if I'm standing right in front of the speaker, then I'm getting 90% direct sound from the speaker. But then I walk out to here, I'm getting 80%. And then I keep going back and keep going back. At a certain point, this is the critical distance. Actually, I just found out today, DC, distance critical, I guess. That's the point at which the point of no return. Your direct sound is no longer doing anything to the room because the reverberant sound equals it. All right? So, and this is why many churches prefer a dry sound, because then they can just put a speaker in it and fill it up with direct sound, and that critical distance is erased. But most of us are dealing with some kind of actual acoustic space. Like here we've got walls that are reverberating, or we might have a dome, or all those kinds of things. That critical distance becomes much more critical. All right, so this is another issue. So some practical advice. How do you deal with this idea of critical distance, of noise floor, all of those kinds of things before feedback? So actually, let's look at this diagram in the middle of the page, and then I'll go into the practical things. Potential acoustic gain, and you see that there is the source. You got the microphone, and look at what this does. You got the microphone on the one end, the listener on the far right, and the loudspeaker above. And it seems like, what does this mean, D2 and all that kind of stuff. But it's simply this. If I were to have a room and I spoke directly into a microphone, just like this, and you were right here with a speaker, it would work perfectly, right? You would hear exactly what I'm saying, and there would be no problem of reverb or anything, right? That would be taking, if you look at your chart here, it would be taking your loudspeaker, moving it extremely close to the listener, therefore decreasing the distance of D2. And then if I were right up to my source, I'd be decreasing the distance to the microphone, the DS, or whatever it is, yeah. But that's not the case usually. So here are a couple things you need to think about. In a real life situation, one of the things that you need to do is you need to get close to the mic, close enough to the mic. If I double the distance away from my mouth, if you were to turn this up so that you could hear me, now you have to turn it up twice as loud to get the same volume, right? Because sound diminishes. So now you can hear me, and now you can't, or as much, because I've moved the distance away from the microphone. It's a very, very critical thing. So when you have, I get a little bit worried when I see these overhead microphones, for example, because those are fairly far away from their sound source. So there's a lot of potential for feedback because they're farther away, and now they're probably just using that to get the kind of the salt and pepper of the drum sound. So they're probably not turning up loud. But if I had like this, You know, I mean, you've had the person, they stand up at the pulpit and they say, I would like to make an announcement about something or other, right? And what happens? Right away, the system starts feeding back. Why? Because to get them to be amplified at all, you have to turn the gain way up. Now, you've got more sound reverberating through the room. More of that sound is coming back into the microphone, and that turns into feedback. That's what feedback is when you create a loop between the speakers and the mic. So that's what you need to be careful about. So first thing you can do, get, as often as you can, get close to the sound source. Get close to the microphone. Second thing, keep mics behind house speakers. So I would not... I'm speaking because there's only one mic open. I'm not worried about being in front of the speakers right here. It's a small group, so we don't need a lot of sound. But if the room were full, I would not be out here. I would make sure that I knew what my parameters were. Is the speaker coming here? Probably there's a wedge, and I could be back. If I were in the middle, I won't be connected to the speakers. It'll be going by me, and so it'll be all right. But I don't want to get in front of that speaker, because then if you look at at that diagram, now I've moved my sound source, my microphone, closer to the speaker. So once again, if you do the equations, you've just now lost more decibels of possibility. Place monitors in mic's dead spot. We talked about that, right? Use that dead spot on a cardioid mic to your advantage. Keep the stage volume down. Oh my goodness. All right, this is a big deal. Remember we talked about the sound floor? This is true in bands as well. This is just classic band problem. There never was a guitarist that wanted to turn down. I mean, I just, if you find that person, introduce me. I've never met the person. Every guitarist, electric guitarist, wants a big Marshall stack. I mean, there's just nothing better than the feeling of playing something and having it ruffle your pants, right? That's just great, right? And it feels just right. The problem is, you have to mix up to the loudest instrument. All right. Typically, it's going to be the drum set. So in a setting like this, you have an acoustic drum set. The drum set sets the sound floor for the mix. This is a little bit different than the sound floor for the room. But it sets that kind of low level or the highest acoustic sound. Then what do we have to do? We have to bring the acoustic guitar up to the level of the drums, just to make it equal with the drums, not to actually amplify it beyond that. But if the drums are up at 60 decibels, then we need to bring the vocalist and the pianist and everybody else up to that level. And that's just to make it even. Now we might want to bump the whole thing up another 10 dB, to push it out. But this is a very important thing. In many of our churches, if you don't have a drum set, maybe the piano is the loudest instrument. All right, so now what we have to do is, if the piano is the loudest instrument, then we have to bring all the other instruments up to the piano, and it's kind of this fine art. I've seen concerts where they mix it so that the guitar is as loud and as boomy as the piano, and to me that's unnatural. It's a smaller instrument than the piano, and so to hear it, kind of overwhelm the piano feels a little bit odd. So some of this is just kind of about natural sound, but from a mixing standpoint, if I have the drum set playing at 60 dB, which is, I think, probably a reasonable guess. It might be louder. I have to set all my monitors and everything up to that level. Now we have 70 or 80 dB on the stage. Now trying to control that is a huge problem. All right. Now everything is open. There's a lot of sound coming from the stage. You can get ringing without ever turning on the speakers in the house. So that's one of the things that you can do, is try to minimize that. Now some people use electronic drums. Never met a drummer that likes electronic drums, but you can use a smaller drum set. You can use alternative sticks that Hot Rods is one of the brand names, that are kind of dowels that are put together. It dissipates a little bit of the energy. You don't get as much sound coming from the drums. So do things to minimize that, and it's gonna help you. Oh, look at that! I'm getting an incoming call. I won't take it. Don't worry. So other things. Keep the stage volume down. Turn off any used mics. All right, we're gonna try an experiment here. I want you to turn up all the mics that the praise team was using, and I want you to listen very carefully. I'm just going to keep talking. Turn up all the microphones that we were using before. I noticed that when Joyce was talking, I was looking at the sound system, and her channel, I could see that her channel was going, but I saw that there were other mics open because I could see the sound coming into it. Yeah. Did you hear that, Noah? Oh! Look at that. I love being right. So listen to what's happened. Instead of having one mic open, which means I have very, very few problems with sound, I've put all the mics open, and now the system is right on the edge of feedback, right? You can take it down now. That's an important point. A lot of people, say, I don't know why the pastor always feeds back. Well, it's because they never turn down the band's microphones. So you've got all of these mics open that are just saying, give me a signal, give me a signal. And so then you're turning up the pastor's mic to get enough sound. It is going out the speakers and into the whole band's mics. So I think the equation is 3 decibels per microphone. So turn off mics that you aren't using, and you're going to be a very happy person. I'm not going to go into ringing out the system. Talked about phantom power. Proximity effect. I will talk about the proximity effect. A cardioid mic has concentrated sound within its pattern. And so one of the liabilities of a cardioid mic, so an Omni microphone actually has a better sound. If you're in a studio and you can have a dead room, an Omni microphone has a great sound, but it picks up feedback too much in this kind of setting. So the cardioid is the thing that you want, but it has a concentrated sound. Now listen to what happens as I get closer to the microphone. I'm talking, and I'm getting closer to the microphone. What's happening right now? I'm not changing my voice at all, right? But suddenly I'm like Barry White, right? Because I'm closer to the microphone. It's called the proximity effect, and look at what just said, proximity effect. Proximity effect, proximity effect, all right? When I get closer to the microphone, the bass piles up and I get more popping, all right? Now, so the things I said about getting close to a microphone, there's a point of diminishing returns. You get too close to the microphone, you get pops, you get noise, you get lip smacking, you get all things like that. So you need to know the microphone. I'm feeling like this is a pretty good range for me to be away from this microphone. It gets me a good sound, it's clean, but I'm not getting the stuff, all that happens here, if I have an alto singing right here, suddenly I've got a bunch of kind of chest noise and air noise that is not part of an alto's sound. It's not even really part of a bass's sound in terms of what they're singing, right? But periodically, your pastor, if it's a man, you might want to have that kind of sound. Garrison Keillor uses this effect, right? So when he talks, you say, oh, he's got this warm, kind of fatherly voice, right? It just feels like you're just sitting by the fire with Garrison Keillor. Well, it's partly by how they mic that voice. But if you have a woman singing, you don't want all that stuff in there because then it's just junk. It's not actually part of their voice. And then it just kills the mix. And it also, all this stuff, right? So be careful about that stuff. Mic technique, we talked a little bit about this. Singers, you need to be careful with the mic. I mean, most mics have a pretty good handling kind of thing, but you can hear just a little bit of something, right? And so if you cannot not fidget, put the thing in a stand and be done with it, right? But learn good technique. Now, the popular thing because of American Idol is doing this all the time. It's the most ineffective thing ever. Have you ever seen somebody do that and they're going like, I'm singing a high note, and in the end, you can't hear the high note because they just pulled their microphone so far away. And the poor sound person, if you think about how sound works, this to this is half as much sound, all right? Physics-wise, half as much sound. Are you really hitting that high note twice as loud as the low notes? Right? So you use it to your advantage. My Jesus, my Savior, shout to the Lord, right? Fine. That little bit of change, that's good mic technique. But this, no, right? Don't sing that high note right into the microphone. Almost done, almost done. The 3-to-1 rule. This is for phasing. If you have a singer and a microphone, and another singer and a microphone, if this is 1 foot, this needs to be 3 feet. It's just the way, if I get too close, those microphones start to color each other. They start to do what's called phasing. And so enough sound from this singer is going into this. If I get past this point, enough sound is going into this person's microphone that you start to get phasing issues. The waves start to cross each other out. So be careful about that. Training volunteers. Good luck. Next point. No, I mean, seriously, like I hate to just say good luck, but if you can get a person to really pay attention, that's fantastic. And usually I have to do a lot of the learning of the system myself in order to train the person well. Question?
My most successful volunteer is an 11-year-old.
Yeah. And, I hate to stereotype, but teenage boys, they are often the ones that are they geek out on technical stuff. They have a basic understanding of how things work in terms of, they're using computers and stuff, and they've figured out, okay, how do I get my 1/8-inch jack out to my stereo, that kind of stuff. And they're thinking about that basic stuff. So they have a basic idea of, when I was a kid, I would, I'd taken out from, I actually at one point had a walkie-talkie that I jerry-rigged as a distortion box. And I don't know why I didn't keep it, because it was the most awesome distortion box ever. But I just learned how do I get the outs from this walkie-talkie? It looks like it might be the red and the green one. All right, which is also true with bombs. Training volunteers, yeah, so do what you can with that. You'll see on the 5th and the 6th page is something that I handed to my volunteers, and it's just kind of a cheat sheet. If you can get someone who is really dedicated and is paying attention, then a cheat sheet like this is really worthwhile. But just in general, protocol of what do you do? What time do you need to get there? What channels need to go up when? We have different settings for the sermon, for recording and all that kind of stuff. When to hire a pro. Let's say I were in this space right here, and I was thinking about how to get the sound better, to make the sound better. One of the things that I would realize pretty quickly is that there are some things that I can do and some things that I wouldn't know how to do. So this room is exactly what you don't want with a room, which is parallel walls. All right? When you have parallel walls, sound flaps back and forth. So listen carefully. You hear what's happening? That's that characteristic kind of slap, and you hear it goes, right? That's because it hits a wall and then it goes right back. All right? So it creates this problem. I mean, that's acousticians will tell you that builders love to make rooms that are square, right? That's easy. But acousticians will tell you it's the worst thing that you can do to a room. So one of the things that I would do is, if I were looking to, I don't know how much money they put into a sound system, but you have to start thinking about how much money you put into things and what kind of return you get. You can get the best sound system in the world, and it's never going to deal with that problem in the room. So if I were here, I would be thinking, all right, let's say I'm going to put $10,000 into a system, all right? Maybe what I need to do is back that down to $5,000 or $8,000 into the system, and put $3,000 to $5,000 into hiring somebody who can treat the room, right? Because once again, you get to the sound floor and all those kinds of things. You can't unreverb a room, all right? So it could very well be that your money is better spent on treating the room than it is on getting the system, all right? And this is it's an important thing. This is, and I'm not using you guys as a bad example by any means, because I like what you do here. But a lot of people will rush. They just got a digital system a couple months ago, and we're going to talk a little bit about digital to analog But a lot of people will rush in. They'll say, "Oh, we're going to get a digital system," and they, it's like self-cleaning kitchens and things like that. It just, it doesn't exactly work that well, right? You need good sound in. We had our in, mix, and out. You need good sound in. You need someone at the mixer who knows what they're doing to actually mix the sound. And you can get the best system in the world, but, so the digital system allows you to save scenes. Now that can be really important. So they have the same bass player with the same setup, and they have a setting for their bass player. They dial in that setting. Great. That just saved a bunch of time, right? But if the person in the back is not mixing that bass well, then you're just dialing in a bad mix every week. You're easily dialing in a bad mix and recalling it easily. So just be aware that there are certain things that are going to be above your head. So it might be worth hiring either an acoustician or a pro sound engineer to come in, set up your system, spend a month with you mixing. And then you inherit it and you kind of take on their settings. So I've been in way too many places where you've got that one person who has a really great stereo system who says, "Oh, I can totally do this system," and they make a mess of it. I mean, I was in this one church, a beautiful, beautiful church, and the guy ordered these speakers that were 4 times as big as that. They're made for a disco. I mean, they're huge, and they're hanging on the wall. It was horrible. I'm like, "Oh, hey, look at us. We saved $1,000. We had a pro in, and nobody wanted to spend $8,000 on a whole system. They wanted to save the money. So now we paid $7,000 instead, and we got big, massive coffin-like black speakers hanging off the walls of this historic church. And in the end, it didn't work, and we had to spend another $2,000 or $3,000 to get somebody else in. All right. I gotta finish. There's just, oh my goodness. Let's just ask any questions you have, and then I'll get you out of here. Sorry to. You're just hungry and want to get to lunch.
We're video recording this, so you can go home and watch it again. Especially if you put your email down on the sheet, I will send you the link for the video recording of it, so you can share it with other people at your church too, or other people.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure we can open up that website for questions as well. So hopefully this gives you a basic idea of how the systems works, how you as a leader can interact with the system and with your volunteers, gives you a little place to start. Any last questions before we? Yeah.
When you're talking sound, I'll call it soundproofing,
Mm-hmm.
and the acoustical foam and acoustical spray, which do you prefer?
I would probably either bring in a pro. I work with a company that I really trust the guy's advice, and so and most of the people that are selling equipment, if they're reputable, can't exactly say, "Oh, this is, you should buy this one," or whatever. But they will lead you in the right direction. So usually, what I'll do is I'll call them up and I'll say, "All right, I need some help with this room. It's a square room. It's plaster. What would you say?" And then he'll lead me in the right direction. There are various baffles. So with the issue with a room like this is that you want to break up the walls. You might be able to do that with some heavy banners. You might be able to do that with some spray or some kind of beveled surfaces or something like that. But you want to break up that squareness. So that would be something that acoustics are voodoo. I don't. Even the acousticians will tell you they can run the numbers, but there's still a certain amount of voodoo to it. You don't know exactly why it's working the way it is. So I would probably get a professional in for that.
The reason I ask is we have they call it the Family Life Center, it's a gymnasium.
Yeah.
200 people in that room, and you literally cannot hear the sound system, period. It's
Yep.
constant roar.
Yep. And that's this critical distance. Your critical distance in a reverberant room moves way, way, way up. So the only things that you can do, knowing this, you can get the speakers closer to the people is one thing you can do. that would be a possibility. So you know, this is why they often put speakers up here and point them down this way. It evens out the distance between the people. But you need to understand, you know, a lot of people will say, oh, we'll fly a system right here. They don't take any measurements about what's the axis of the sound. So this group is completely out, all right? Or they'll say, oh, well, we need more speakers. So we'll put these right here, and then we'll put speakers back at that pole. But they don't delay them so that they're in sync. And then they phase each other out, and they wonder why it doesn't work. They wonder why it doesn't sound right. Well, because this speaker is phasing against that one. So that's where it gets very tricky. I need to let you guys go. So thank you very much. Feel free to contact me or go to that website and ask questions from the website. Thanks.